So about the usual class, are there any questions so far? So last week we started working on the application of transformation methods for derivative pricing. And for numerical routines, we have already discussed the first Fourier transform and the fractional first Fourier transform. Both are reasonably quick. We have talked about their pros and cons. Of course, the algorithms are reasonably complicated, I understand, but once you start working with them, writing codes or looking at codes. By the way, I also shared, so let me also share my screen. I also shared a couple of computing links in the classroom. So can you see that on the screen here? One is from the Python website and the other is a common math computation website.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Yeah. So have any of you visited these web pages?
I have visited the Python web page.
Yes. So if you have visited, so I will ask all of you to do so. Actually, visit both of these. There are many codes already available there for solving PDEs numerically and other numerical analysis routines. And some of them will be helpful when you are doing assignments for this computational finance course, because you don't really need to write all the code. Some of those codes are already done, already available. So what you need to do is customize them for your models. So that's one thing, because from this point onward, we are going to talk about a lot of numerical routines. So most of it will be numerical analysis. Some of it will be boring, I understand. Some of them will be slightly complicated algorithms, but the corresponding codes written by professionals to a large extent are available. So you can use them, you can customize them, and it will be faster and easier for you then. Okay, so again, back to the course proper. Any other questions or clarifications about what we have done in chapter 2 so far? Okay, so if you are okay with the material so far, then I will start with the third computation method, the third and actually the fastest. So the third method is called the Fourier cosine method, because it uses only the cosine part of the Fourier expansion. So if I think of the Fourier expansion in the trigonometric form, it will be a cos theta plus I sin theta kind of series. And in this method, we plan to use only the cosine part of that expansion. And empirically, one can show that this is actually the fastest among the three methods we are going to discuss in this chapter. So Fourier cosine expansion improves on the classic FFT in that it provides a lot of speed improvement. And because it is faster, we can definitely do more. We will actually show that we can do more complex derivative pricing using the cosine method compared to the Fourier, the fractional or the fast Fourier transform methods. This superior performance will also help us if we want to make it faster, we can reduce number of terms. And a big advantage of the cosine method is that it separates the derivation of the coefficients in the series from the terminal payoff calculation. In the Fourier transform, the classic Fourier transform methods, fast or fractional, we used to do we used to work with a range of strike prices, so a range of terminal payoffs, and we wanted to compute them at one go, because the computation of the last term and the series expansion terms were connected. So you cannot really separate them. So what you do is basically you don't solve for one single option, you solve for a series of n options for different strike prices in n log n time. So effectively per option your cost is log n order. So that's what we talked about earlier. And that happened because we could not separate the terminal and the series expansion in the computation steps. Advantage of the cosine method, which we will see shortly, advantage of cosine method is this separation can be achieved. So we have one set algorithm for the expansion, the series expansion term evaluation, and we can add on the terminal payoff computation. So even if we change the strike price, the terminal payoff function changes, the whole computation need not be redone. One can just plug in. So is this clear? Am I making sense? So I will just repeat once more. In the fast Fourier transform method, we have seen that the computation for the whole series expansion terms as well as the terminal payoff was done at one go using this kind of matrix manipulations. So computations were simultaneous. If I were to do it for only one particular strike price, it would be costly because it would be order of n log n computations. So in practical applications, what is usually done is you take a series of a sequence of strike prices, maybe n of them. So that results in a range of options and you compute them at one go. So your n log n computation delivers n many option prices. So per option cost is reduced. That was the strategy in case of the fast Fourier transform class. For the cosine transform methods, we will show that these two parts can be separated and hence the terminal payoff calculation becomes an independent component, so it can be changed in any way we like. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So again, we will start with a basic description of the pluses and minuses. So what are the admissible models in our cosine method? Again, all models for which we have a characteristic function. So that requirement does not change. That is needed for all the transformation based methods. The option types allowed are again path independent European options with a wide variety of terminal payoffs. Because as I said, now the terminal payoff part is separated. We can show that it is separated. So the variety of terminal payoff that is allowed is more. In fact, later on, we will also discuss some path dependent option pricing also. Using this same algorithm, same strategy, we can tweak it, we can extend it to include some of the path dependent options. So actually the applicability of the cosine method is even broader. We will see that, but let me first take up the basics. The advantages are it allows for pricing under any model with a characteristic function. This is actually the fastest known Fourier based method, fastest among the three that we are discussing. And this is a big advantage. It separates model from the payoff, the terminal payoff. So in effect, it can support a wider variety of derivatives. The disadvantages are as before, that we are restricted to path independent European options, with the caveat that some path dependent options can be accommodated. We will see how. There are two parameters, some upper bound and lower bound, which needs to be decided a priori. So we require estimation of a proper range of values A to B, which has to be fixed. Remember earlier in the fractional or the usual fast Fourier transform methods, we needed to decide on an upper bound capital B. Here we need two bounds, lower and the upper both. And again, like the other Fourier transform methods, the cosine method will be inaccurate for highly out of the money options. So that disadvantage stays. What we are getting in addition by using the cosine method are, first, it is faster, and secondly, it can separate the terminal from the series expansion, so a wider variety of payoffs can be accommodated. So that's the premise for studying this additional method. And this additional method is a little different, so it is going to be a little bit complicated in terms of the expansion. All right. So let me start with the cosine series expansion. Many of you have already seen this before. Whoever have studied the Fourier series, you have also seen the cosine series because it's one part of the Fourier series. So the Fourier cosine expansion for any function f on the range 0 to pi, because that's the trigonometric range, is given by f theta half a0 plus summation k equal to 1 to infinity ak cos k theta. AKs are the Fourier cosine coefficients, and those are given by this integral 2 by pi 0 to pi f theta cos k theta d theta. So this is the cosine series expansion. This is part of the Fourier series, where in Fourier series we talk about e to the power I theta. Here we are talking about cos theta, and not looking at the other term, which is I sine theta, which is the purely imaginary part. So basically we are taking out the real part of the Fourier expansion. Okay, this is clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is something that we more or less already know. A little bit of notation. This summation here in this equation 2.21 in this book is written in this following way. So the summation is written from 0 to infinity with an additional bar above to indicate that the first term, which is a0, because cos will be 1, the first term is given the weightage half. So this term is not the same weightage as the other terms. That is what is indicated by this bar above the summation symbol. So that will be the convention for the book. So this is what is written here, that this bar above the summation says that the first term will be half the weightage. The other terms have weightage 1. All right. So we can extend the definition, this particular definition, to arbitrary function. So any arbitrary function on a finite interval can be used, because 0 to pi, I can always map into any finite interval. So suppose I have a range a to b, some finite range a to b. All I need to do is define theta equal to this. So if x belongs to a to b, then theta will belong to 0 to pi. That's the typical standard linear transformation we have been using from our high school. So talking about 0 to pi does not lead to any lack of generality, but it leads to the choice of a finite interval. So, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that for cosine expansion, I need to decide on a finite interval. So suppose this is what I start with, that I have a function f defined on, so fx defined on any finite interval a to b. I redefine it in terms of theta using this transformation, so that my x is given by this 2.24. So instead of my 2.21 equation here in terms of theta on 0 to pi, I have this transformed equation 2.25, which is for fx, where x is on a to b. Again, the same notation, summation with a bar, ak cos k x minus a b minus a times pi, because that maps a to b into 0 to pi. And similarly, 2.22 now becomes 2.26, which is with this transformation. Instead of 2 by pi, I have 2 by b minus a, fx cos, and the argument inside is the same argument here, k pi x minus a b minus a dx. So this is just trivial transformation, nothing to talk about, but that brings us to the issue that for our cosine series expansion work, we need to decide on a and b. It has to be a finite interval. Okay. Given that provision, now let us turn our attention to the real object of the exercise, the characteristic function. That's what we want to discuss. That's what we want to analyze. Okay. So for any distribution function, fx, probability function, my characteristic function is given by e to the power I nu x, which is e to the power I nu x fx dx over minus infinity to infinity over the whole real line. And I can do the same change of variable here very easily and define it in terms of theta in 0 to pi, so that I get back to the trigonometric flavor. So I will use a new variable. So I evaluate the characteristic function at k pi by b minus a. If I do that, k pi by b minus a, then this is the changed expression that I get, and this is the expression that I will be using for the transformations, because that is the transformation I need here, k pi by b minus a. We will be using that. Now comes the truncation. Because I have the integration on the whole real line, I have to truncate it into a finite interval, into a finite subinterval. So let us call this truncated integral as phi hat. So phi, remember, is over the whole real line. Instead, let us talk about phi hat, which is only from a to b. And you know what we are going to do for all practical purposes. We are going to take a to be a reasonably large negative number and b to be a reasonably large positive number, and hope that the remaining parts outside this range is reasonably small and can be ignored. That is not anything new, because that's what we have been doing many times in the past also. So approximate the whole real line by a finite interval with reasonably large bound. So this phi hat is what we are going to be working with finally, 227. Okay. So what do? I have made a change of variable from x to pi, from x to theta. So I want that to be reflected here. So I multiply this 227 both sides by this e to the power minus I k pi a by b minus a. That is for the transformation. So this side I have this additional term, and on this side I have this e to the power term outside, which I can take inside, because if I take it inside, then I have got theta here. I have a term which is exactly like theta. It will be exactly like this, k pi x minus a b minus a, as in 225. So now let us expand the Fourier term, this e to the power I term, into trigonometric terms. So I have cos theta, which is this is actually theta, plus I sine theta fx dx. So my phi hat is now given by this integral over a finite range a to b, because that's what I have, that's where I have truncated these two terms. So now if I take the real part of this phi hat times e to the power minus etc., what I will get is the cosine integral part. So 228 is the crux of the matter for us, that we ignore the purely imaginary part, take only the real part of the integral and work with that. All right, is it okay so far?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is the one 228 that we'll be working with. Now suppose, so this is where the numerical approximation idea comes in, that suppose we have chosen A and B in such a way, that means we have chosen A sufficiently large, B sufficiently large, so that this finite integral phi hat A to B is a very good approximation of the whole integral phi nu. So basically what we are saying, that what we claimed earlier, that make suitable choices for A to B, so that whatever remaining part of the integrals on the tails that we are ignoring, they are very small. So these two integrals can be assumed to be approximately equal. So of course, it will require some conditions on the density function fx, but usually all the good densities have this property. You can make them small, make the tail integrals small enough. Then if I compare this 228, this real part here, with 226 above, this cosine, I can also say that AK, this coefficients AK is defined like this. AK will be equal to 2 by B minus A and then real part of this. Because if you look at this integral here, this right hand side of 228, that is same as the right hand side of 226. And if I assume that these two integrals are very close to each other, then I can also say that I can take AK equal to this real part phi hat, and safely make the assumption that this AK will be equal to the correct expression, where the correct expression is actually given by phi instead of phi hat, because phi hat is where we made the truncation. Phi hat is where we made the truncation, and phi was the actual expression. So our assumption is that if we can make these two integrals close to each other, then this AK, the truncated version, and this FK, the actual version, will also be close to each other. So if I substitute Fk by Ak in the Fourier expansion of Fx, we will get an approximate cosine expansion. So the actual cosine expansion for Fx was involving the correct coefficients. Instead, if we use the approximate coefficients, we claim that we can recover almost the correct function. So in our notation, that almost correct function is called f hat, that is our estimate. What is the nature of this estimate? I use the same kind of expression, but I insert the approximate coefficient. And again, because it's an infinite summation, and on an algorithm I cannot have infinite sums, I will need a further truncation in the number of terms in the summation. So in the end, what I propose is this f tilde as my estimate of f, where I have truncated the sum at some suitably large number, capital N minus 1. So there has been 2 rounds of truncation and approximation through that. One truncation was in the integral instead of the whole real line, using some finite range A to B. And the second approximation was through the truncation of the infinite sum here, and truncating it at some suitably large number, capital N minus 1. Okay, so this is the strategy. This is the representation approximate representation of the characteristic function as well as the density function. So in effect, these are my numerical estimates for the true characteristic function and true density functions. All right, is it okay so far?
Yes, sir.
So now let us use it for option pricing. So let us now apply this expansion idea into our option pricing strategy. So which we call cosine option pricing. Again, this is the notation. So it is slightly different from earlier. So it is repeated here. So X be the modeled quantity, which is stock price, log stock price at time small t. Y is the corresponding terminal log stock price. Terminal means at time capital T. If y given x is the conditional density function. So if I start at time small t, what is the conditional distribution of the terminal stock price given today's information? V is the corresponding value of the option. It has to be a path independent option. So Vxt is the current value and Vyt is the value at expiration. So that's the terminal value. So X is basically log s small t and Y is log s capital T. So then my option value at time small t can be written as Vxt. So Vxt must be this again appropriate normalizing constant a to b Vyt Fy given x dy. So it's an expected value, conditional expectation of Vyt over the range a to b. And again, a suitable choice of A and B will be required. But in case of a log stock price, we can make very good finite interval assumptions and get good bounds. Good in the sense that it will be very close to the true value. Because we know that under the usual normal distribution models, the probabilities that the tail probabilities go to zero exponentially fast. So any finite truncation will not matter much. So again, using that 225 and 226, which are these equations for fx and ak, we use them here. And we write our Vxt as this integral Vyt, and then f I expand in terms of my cosine series. So again, I use my cosine series expansion for f, and I can actually interchange. So one can show that I can actually interchange this summation and the integral. And I write this as summation ak, and this whole integral inside is the contribution of the terminal payoff. All right. So this is my expression using the cosine series expansion, which we will be using for computation. Now, let us first define Vk, V sub k as equal to 2 by b minus a, this integral inside. This whole integral inside for a particular k is denoted by Vk. So then in our notation, V small vxt, the option price, will be given by b minus a by 2 c times summation ak vk. So vk is just for each k the corresponding integral normalized. These are the terms that will be computed in the algorithm. And of course, we have to truncate our sum because otherwise our algorithm will not work. We will approximate Vxt by a summation which extends only up to capital N minus 1. So Vxt is approximately equal to, everything else is the same, but the summation is from k to capital N minus 1, where again, I can take capital N to be large enough so that this approximation is equal to the true value for all practical purposes. Because now we have very fast computers, we can really take capital N to be very large, A and B also very large. Okay, so I substitute this 231 expression here. So if I substitute the 231 expression, we get the option premium in terms of the characteristic function of the model and a coefficient Vk, which can be computed through this formula. So what we finally have is the following. Vxt is this summation real part of phi e to the power minus ik pi etc. times Vk. So this Ak, as I said, we did that approximation using the real part here, this 233. That expression we put back inside the option price expression. So I have a truncation here, finite sum. I have an approximation for the integral here because I have truncated the range. So using these two approximations, as we have done earlier, I plug the terms back in, and this is what I have. So Ak is closely approximated by this real term, real part of this. Vk is this integral, which is a close approximation because I can choose A to be large enough, and capital N also can be chosen to be large enough. And now if you look at this expression, you will see that if I know the characteristic function, I can write this code very easily, and computations will happen quite efficient in an efficient manner. And you see, as we mentioned earlier, that we can separate the terminal payoff and the series expansion terms. This is where it comes in. So here it comes in a product manner, multiplicative manner. So the series expansion terms are independent of the terminal payoff term. So what happens is, if I change the terminal payoff in the sense that I change the strike price, I can just reinsert it here. The other part of the computation will remain the same. So the algorithm is in a sense separable in the two components. All right. So is the algorithm clear so far? So what we have done is, we have started out with the cosine series expansion, which is like the real part of the Fourier expansion. We have done 2 rounds of approximation and used them, plugged them back into the option payoff to get a finite sum, like this finite sum 237, which we can make to be a very good approximation of the true option price. And the calculations here are defined in such a way that the terminal and the series expansion calculations are separated. Any questions? No questions. Okay. All right. So let me then talk about some of the numerical performances. So this table 2.5, so these are all from HITSA. So you can look at the book also. So table 2.5 is a performance comparison between cosine and fractional FFT for the geometric Brownian motion. And because for geometric Brownian motion model, we can analytically find the expression for European option prices, the comparison will be absolute. So we have the theoretically correct expression which can be evaluated. We have the numerical value from fractional FFT, and we also have the numerical value from the cosine method. then now we can compare these. For this model, the parameters chosen are strike initial stock price to be 100, 10% rate of interest, 0.1 is the time to maturity in an annual scale, volatility is 0.25. The comparison is made based on 3 strikes, alternative strikes, 80, 100, and 120. And the reference values computed from the theoretical Black-Scholes solution are already known to us. So this 20.799, 3.66, and 0.045 are absolutely correct values. So we can also compare with respect to this absolute benchmark. So what happens here? So suppose can you go on mute, please? Can you go on mute, please? Okay. So with these parameter values, so this is the comparison. And remember that this is from the book. So obviously, if you compute them now using your CSSC server machine, these times might be even less, because this is like 4 or 5 years old results, at least 4 or 5 years old. So computing power must have improved. But anyway, the comparison is what we are actually interested in. So for 80 strike price, if I use only n equal to 16, so what n I choose also matters, because that will of course increase the number of terms in my summation. So computing time will go up. So from 16 to 64 to 256, the CPU time in milliseconds is given by 166, 184, and 0.409. So this is the time comparison for the cosine method. If I look at the fractional FFT for the same n, these are the corresponding time units required. So it is pretty much 6-7 times. Even with n equal to 256, it's like 7 times, and for smaller n, it's even more. So cosine is substantially faster. What about relative error? Even in terms of relative error, the cosine is doing better for k equal to 80. And if I compare with the theoretically correct price, we can see that for n equal to 64, cosine method is already matching the theoretically correct price, whereas the fractional FFT is still way off, and it converges to the theoretically correct price only for n equal to 256. So cosine is certainly better on both counts in terms of error margin as well as computing time. If I look at the other strike prices, 100 and 120, similar comparisons can be seen in terms of computing time. Cosine is much faster. And if I look at the correctness in the sense that for k equal to 100, our benchmark is 3.66. Again, cosine method is achieving that at 64 already. Fractional FFT achieves it only at 256. When I talk about 120 strike price, again, cosine method is there much before the fractional FFT. So for the simplest model, geometric Brownian motion, we can easily see that cosine method is a, so I was going to say Pareto improvement, but I guess it's, I should say vector dominates fractional FFT. Okay, is that correct? So it is better on both counts, unambiguously better on both counts. Okay, so now let us come to other models where analytical prices are not available. Let's talk about the Heston stochastic volatility model. For Heston model, again, we talk about similar parameters. So initial stock price 100, we take the risk-free rate to be 0 to make the calculation simpler. Time to maturity is longer. The other parameters for the Heston model, lambda, eta, theta, mu naught, rho, these are chosen like this. You can match with the model and find out what these things mean. Again, 3 alternative strikes are considered. The reference values, the supposedly correct prices are computed using a fractional FFT with n equal to 2 to the power 15 points. So this is like huge. And you can safely take it as the theoretically correct value. So those theoretically correct values are 32.58, 22.3, and 14.8058. Now, so if I use fractional FFT with 2 to the power 15, I can safely assume that I will get the correct values, and then I can compare it with results from fractional FFT for more reasonable n, for much smaller n. So again, our comparisons are done in terms of 16, 64, and 256. So 4, 6, and 8 only. And again, you can see that for n equal to 64, the cosine method is already pretty close to the theoretically correct value, but so is the fractional FFT. So now for Heston models, the advantage in terms of correctness, computational correctness, is not different anymore. So both the cosine method and the fractional FFT method gets to the correct value, quote unquote correct value, at about the same time. So where is the advantage? The advantage is now still in the computation time, but again, this difference is not as great as for the geometric Brownian motion earlier, but it is unambiguously better. So correctness or error is more or less at the same level, but computational time is still less for the cosine method compared to the fractional FFT. Again, for all configurations, so it is clearly better. And finally, we look at the variance gamma model. Again, similar kind of parameters. And again, the reference values are given here, computed for a very large fractional FFT. And we will see that now for the variance gamma model, my computational correctness for cosine method is better because it is converging to the correct value faster than the fractional FFT method on all the 3 strikes, and definitely the computing time comparison is similar as in the Heston model. It is like 2/3 time is being taken. So I take 2/3 time and I am converging faster than the fractional FFT. Faster in the sense with smaller n, smaller number of terms in my summation. So that's why actually summing up, one can confidently state, as Hitsa did, that the cosine method is the fastest among all the 3 methods. The FFT, then the fractional FFT, and the cosine itself. Not only that, the convergence to the true value is also quicker, so one can use less number of terms in the expansion. So I have double advantage. So for each fixed n, I save time, and also if I use the cosine method, I can use a smaller n, so I save more time. Okay, so we'll take a break here unless you have anything to ask me, or you can ask me after the break if you want. So let me pause my recording. Yeah, recording has started. Any questions so far? on the cosine method? Okay, no questions. Good. So let me continue with the next application of the cosine method. And as I said in the beginning, that cosine method may be used for pricing some of the path dependent options also. Even though the transformation methods are primarily meant for path independent options, the cosine method can be extended cleverly to take care of some of the particular path dependent options. And this application is actually due to Oosterley and Fang. This is a paper in 2009. And in this paper, they presented a method for pricing some types of path dependent options using backward induction. So they are using backward induction in combination with the cosine method. All right. Now, before we move on to the actual discussion, do any of you know what is a backward induction? Is backward induction a familiar term to any of you?
No, sir.
Abhinandan is officially here. Is Abhinandan actually here?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain backward induction?
Explain. So backward induction is based on the principle of stochastic of dynamic programming. So at any point of time, we see the potential paths to the end and optimize over that. And so up to level T, you have optimized all possible paths, and then from T-1, you look at those optimal versions that we have already obtained up from the previous point, and then see which paths to obtain to again find the next optimal path. That is the principle.
It's not very clear. What you have said is right, but is it clear? If I were to ask you to explain this to a group of students in a junior class, would you have done it the same way?
And then I would have prepared it the last day.
Okay. So, but let me then just explain backward induction informally. So
Okay.
as Abhinandan correctly said, it's a dynamic optimization exercise. Now, dynamic in what sense? When we are looking at path independent options, the only exercising decision is taken in the end. So there is only one decision node. So whatever happens before is completely out of your control. And all you can do is find the conditional probability distribution. That's it. There is no decision to be taken till the end. But now suppose I give you an American option. That's our first example of a path-dependent option with multiple decision nodes. In fact, theoretically, for an American option, there are infinitely many decision nodes because you can exercise it at any point of time before capital T if you want. So when we talked about pricing an American option, we said that suppose we were to have a situation where there is no dividend and a fixed non-stochastic fixed rate of interest, then one can show that actually the holder of the option will always find it optimal to wait till the end. So in effect, an American option will not be exercised before maturity. The American call option, let me correct myself, I'm sorry, American call option will not be exercised before maturity. So the price will be same as the European call option. But we also said that this is not true if there are dividends. And just before the dividend nodes or just after the dividend nodes, I have a significant decision to take, whether I should exercise the option right now or wait till the end. So in that discussion, if you recall last term, we described a scenario where there are finitely many. So suppose there is one dividend to be announced within the lifetime of the American option. To keep things simple, just say there is one possible dividend date. And I know that from before. Now, once the dividend is announced and the stock price is recalculated, as you know that the stock price will change after the dividend. The value will be, the dividend will be deducted from the value of the company, so stock prices will be reduced. After the dividend is announced, then the remaining life of the American option is same as earlier without any dividend situation. So the pricing and the exercise decision will also be exactly like earlier. So in effect, after the dividend, in the remaining life, my American option will behave like an European option. So the only significant decision node will be just before the dividend date. If I choose to keep it at that point, then I will go up to capital T. There is no other decision node. So then it will behave like an European option. The only thing I can do differently is I may exercise it just before the dividend date. So in effect, I have two decision nodes, one just before the dividend date and the other one at maturity. So if I wanted to evaluate that American option, I would have to do it in two steps, starting from the end. First evaluation will be at the end at capital T. Then I will go one step back and look at the just before the dividend time point. So what will happen is I'll be combining the branches of the tree, collapsing them together into expected values and moving backwards to time 0. I don't remember whether I have mentioned the name of the method, but this is backward induction. When I have a dynamic decision-making problem, where in the lifetime of the problem there are multiple decision nodes, the method that we usually employ to solve it is called backward induction. And now you can intuitively think of a situation where there are multiple dividend nodes, and hence there are more than two decision points. And the same principle will apply. We will again start solving the problem from the last time point, from capital T, and go backwards. So we will gradually, we will sequentially evaluate our decisions at the dividend time points or just before the dividend time points till we come to the first dividend. And whatever expected value comparisons we have done last term, that Pliska example, if you recall, same thing will be applicable. And this is backward induction. Is that any better? Do you understand the idea of the methodology? I have not talked about the methodology, but just the idea. Of course, you need to remember the American option binomial tree calculations from last term, from Pliska's book, which is like a long time ago. But if you do, is this clear? Or if it is not clear, you have to ask me what is the source of confusion, and then I can try and explain again. So I will need a response either way. Either it is clear, you have understood, or it's not clear. And where is the source of confusion? Then I can try and explain again. So which one is it? I will need a response, because this is something that we have not formally covered in the class, but I'm going to use the concept. Can you all hear me? Am I audible? Or is there something wrong with my connection? Hello?
Sir, at this time point, this is not clear, the concept of backward induction, and so, sir, I shall let you know in the next class.
But do you remember the American option binomial tree calculation? That is
Yes.
So that is my canonical example for backward induction, and we are extending that. So as I discuss this application here, we will go back to that. We will revisit that principle. So of course, you should look back and revise that, and then ask me questions on Friday, if any. All right. So let us proceed with that proviso, that backward induction is a method where you evaluate a dynamic decision-making problem beginning with the end. So you start from the end and go step by step backwards. And why it is the right thing to do, that part we are not really discussing. It's part of a dynamic programming principle. And again, that principle is attributed to a few people. One of them is Bellman. And I started this course by quoting Bellman from his autobiography, if you remember. So Oesterle and Fang's method uses backward induction with the cosine method. And the important equations here are 234, which evaluates the VK coefficients, and 237, which uses the VK coefficients and the real part of the cosine expansion, the AK terms, to compute the price of the option. So these two equations we need to remember. And this is what will be combined with the backward induction method to price an option called the Bermudan option. So Bermudan option, again, we discussed last term, but let us recall. So this is the first example that Oesterle and Fang has worked out and is presented in the book here. So what is the option? The Bermudan option is an option which is exercisable at a discrete set of dates prior to their final maturity. So it is not as good as an American option, which I can exercise anytime I want, but it is better than an European option. Because in European option, I have only one exercise date. In a Bermudan option, I have a finitely many, but more than one dates for exercise. So what is our notation for this thing? So let T naught be the initial time. Let me make it slightly bigger. So T naught is the initial time, and T capital M is the terminal time, expiry date, which is capital T. But in between, I have T1, T2 up to T capital M minus 1, some intermediate time points, which are my exercise dates. And T capital M is, of course, by default an exercise date. So I actually have capital M many possible exercise dates, including the exercise at maturity. So this is better than an European option. I have multiple exercise dates, but it is not as unlimited as the American option, which has infinitely many. Without loss of generality, we assume that the time gap between two successive exercise points are equal. So we assume that these exercise dates are equidistant. So each gap is equal to some delta t, some common delta t. So it is like if I have a 3-month option, then every Monday is a possible exercise day. To price a Bermudan option, we now use the same logic as for that American option binomial tree example. Because you see, in a binomial tree setting, an American option is like a Bermudan option. Because I am not considering continuous time. I am only considering discrete days, discrete time points where my decisions can be taken. In a discrete setup, that's what we work with. So a Bermudan option is basically a discrete time American option situation. Is that clear? Is that connection clear? If you
Yes,
remember the binomial tree? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So for the Bermudan option, we do the same thing as in the binomial tree example. At each node, we decide between two things. One is immediate exercise and the other is continuation. So I can either continue till the next period, unless I am already at the last period. I can continue till the next period, or I can exercise immediately. So my payoff also has two possible parts, two parts. So the value is split into two parts. One is the continuation value, which is the value that I expect to get if I continue, which is an expectation exercise. And the other part is the value if I exercise it right now. So it is the immediate exercise payoff. So either I have a continuation value carrying on, or I have an immediate exercise payoff exiting right now. These are the two possibilities at each of these TM points. T1, T2 up to T capital M minus 1. Now, how does this optimization or decision-making problem work? So you see, in effect, we are going to give you, I'm trying to give you an informal introduction to backward induction method or dynamic optimization. But of course, I will be omitting a lot of details, technical details. Instead, we will try to focus on the example at hand, which is specifically Bermudan option pricing, and try to give you the intuition behind the approach. So at time Tm minus 1, so this is somewhere in between 0 and capital M, the value, let us call it Vx Tm minus 1, x is my log stock price, consists of, again, the continuation value and the early exercise payoff. Early exercise means immediate exercise at Tm minus 1. So 237, this equation here, will be used for that calculation purpose. How so? So 237, we try to find an approximated continuation value. What is a continuation value? Now suppose I do not exercise immediately. That means at time Tm minus 1, it is like I have a Bermudan option starting at time Tm minus 1, which will expire at capital T, and all the remaining intermediate exercise points are still available to me. So if I am at T3, then it is like I am starting a new option at T3, where my possible exercise options at T4, T5 up to T capital M are still available. But now the time period has been shortened. Earlier, my life of the option was T capital M to T capital, T capital M minus T0. Now it is T capital M minus T3. So I have a shorter life, fewer number of exercise points, but otherwise the nature of the contract remains the same. Is this clear? That as if I have a new contract at Tm minus 1 if I am not exercising right now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So now let us use equation 237 to find the option price of this new contract. This new contract starting at Tm minus 1 with the current stock price at X. So I forget about the past. I am starting afresh from Tm minus 1. So I will have the same formula again. The same formula will of course work in principle, only the VK terms which were earlier the unconditional ones, starting from the initial part here, will now have to be modified. These VK terms will be modified with new information at time Tn, because information has changed, the stock price has changed. So my current time is now Tm. So Vk I denote as Vk of Tm. So Vk based on new information set, which I write here. So this is the Vk integral term as before in 234 here. Only now the calculations will be based on the remaining time instead of capital T. Actually, this is a wrong notation. I will correct it later on. So this should be capital T minus Tm. Okay. Is this clear to all of you? That this here I should have the remaining time. Instead of the whole of capital T, now it is only T minus Tm. Otherwise, the formula remains the same. The input is changed. The input is now Vy and the remaining time. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is the continuation calculation. As I said, I have two alternative decisions, two alternative moves at the node Tm. I can either continue or I can exercise immediately. If I exercise immediately, my exercise payoff will be given by the usual formula. The usual formula would be for a call option, it is stock price minus strike price, positive part of it. And for a put option, the reverse. So this equation 255 actually combines both of these possibilities. So if you take alpha equal to 1 here, it will be the call option payoff. And if you take alpha equal to minus 1 here, it will become the put option payoff. Where e to the power x is the log stock value. So e to the power is the log stock value. It is the log stock value divided by the strike price. So strike price is acting as the standardization. So that's why I have a k outside and minus 1 inside. So if I simplify it, it will just be the log stock price minus log strike, as in the original characteristic function definition. So this is written in a fancy way here. So if you just look at it carefully, it is understandable, but written in a compact manner to cover both the call case and the put case. So X is my acting as my initial now. So X is log stock price at Tm minus 1 divided by K. Y is the terminal. So the terminal now I take only for the next decision node. So I am basically trying to solve the problem only for the interim segment, only one single segment. And for put and call, I have combined them. So what is happening is now, if I exercise, I will get this Gx value at time Tm minus 1. If I continue, I will get the Cxtm minus 1 value, which is computed through 253 and 254. So my decision at the time point Tm minus 1 will be based on which one is bigger. So my valuation, my value of the option at this time Tm minus 1 will be max of these two things. So bigger of these two quantities. So at that time point, I will evaluate the choices, immediate pair exercise, where I get G, and continuation, where I expect to get C. So whichever is bigger, I will use that, and that then is my value for the option at time Tm minus 1. Again, is this clear to all of you? What we are trying to do? So at time Tm minus 1, I am trying to solve the problem of continuing or exercising. If I exercise, it is as if I now have a new contract starting at Tm minus 1. So I can evaluate it using the cosine method with a different starting point. So VKTM. Or I can exercise immediately and get this payoff. There are some notational problems here, so I'm going to correct them. I can see now. But is the idea clear? So just recall the binomial model calculations last term. It is the same kind of logic. I think if you are working on this, you will be immediately able to identify the notational problems. There are quite a few. So just try to understand the logic. I will correct the expressions. Are you checking this? So have you checked it? These two expressions, how are they coming together here in 256? I will need a confirmation before I move on, so let me know. So once again, have you checked this thing? The expressions, there are some problems, but conceptually, is it clear to you how the calculation is going to operate? At each exercise node, I am going to compare between continuing and immediate exercise. And for the continuing payoff, what I do is I consider the problem as if it's a new contract starting at that point. So I do the calculations as before with a new starting point here. And then finally, these two quantities will be compared to take the decision. Is this part clear?
Sir.
Yes. Is it clear? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
It's clear.
Yeah. So, but there are some problems with the expressions that you should be able to identify now, and I will correct them. But this is what happens. So the key point for this method is then computationally how to get hold of VKTM. And VKTM is difficult. Why VKTM is difficult? Because if you start with any arbitrary time point in the middle, then I'm working with random quantities. And there are a lot of decision points in between, so a lot of things can change. So it will be extremely complex if I were to start at any intermediate time point where there are many more decisions to happen. So the easiest way to do it will be to start from the end. From the end where there are not many more decisions to be taken. So the easiest problem will be at the expiry date where there is no continuation option. That would be the easiest problem. And then we go to the next easiest problem, which is T capital M minus 1 time point, which is the last intermediate exercise node. So to calculate VKTM, which is difficult, we use the backward induction method because the option value during the next period, this VYTM expression here, and the corresponding coefficients VKTM here are unknown except I am at expiry. So if I am at expiry, then I actually know what is the value and then I can calculate the coefficients directly. But otherwise, there are too many possibilities and it is not possible to compute. So we will use backward induction. So for that, we define these quantities first. So these two quantities, C and G. So CK, this is for this continuation payoff calculation, and this G for the exercise payoff calculation. So CK x1 x2 tm, so this is the time point, is defined as 2 by b minus a integral from x1 x2 cxtm, which we have used here, and is the cosine part. And similarly, the immediate exercise term gk x1 x2 is again an integral of gxtm and the cosine part. So these two expressions we will require. Let's see how. The coefficients associated with the continuation and the exercise will be given by these two, this 257, 258. We have the following analytical form for CK. So CK can be solved with some trouble. CK can be solved for e to the power minus r delta t. This summation, again truncated summation, real part of phi k pi Vj Tm plus 1 Mkj x1 x2. So Vj Tm plus 1 is similar V terms starting from the next decision node. Tm plus 1 is the next decision node, and Mk is defined like this. What is Mk? Mk is again a combination of the two possible decisions at the next node. Either I continue or I exercise. So here I have two parts, and these two parts can again be calculated explicitly. Of course, if I were to calculate them for an intermediate point of time, there will be too many terms involved. So as I said, we will start from the end. So for CK, we will have a combination of further continuity and exercise at the next node, which we will try to evaluate from the end backwards. And for G, the immediate exercise, we have this expression, which is similar to the call or put expression that we put up in here, 255. This is a generalization of 255. So the analytical form is given by this, where this chi and phi are these two complicated terms, which combines the possibilities of the stock price being bigger than the strike price and less than the strike price. So these are complicated calculations, but if you are at the last decision node, then these expressions will get simplified more. The calculation of the CK can be done using first Fourier transform, because if you look at CK terms here, they are like our first Fourier transform matrix calculations. So those matrix calculation ideas can be directly used for calculation of CK. And finally, then VK calculation, we will do combining them. So VK will be given by CK plus GK for a particular X star M and call option, and slightly differently for the put option. But how is it done? So we find a point X star M, some value, such that we are exactly breaking even. So X star M is that log stock price at which we are indifferent between continuing and exercising immediately. So it is like our marginal point. So if the stock price is slightly more, I will immediately exercise the call option. If it is slightly less, I will continue. For the put option, it will be the other way around. So it is called the early exercise boundary at time Tm. So at time Tm, X star M is the boundary of early exercise. Now again, we have to solve this using some numerical method, maybe Newton-Raphson or bisection, whatever. But once we are able to find X star M, in terms of that X star M, this Vk can be defined using C and the G functions. So at time Tm, I can find this Ck and G functions and combine them together. This C and G, I combine them together to get my Vk. Now, why is backward induction easy? Because if I were at the last time point, to begin with, let us start with the last time point. There is no continuation. So I don't have any C terms for my Vk. So if I were at T capital M, which is the expiry, capital T, then my calculation is pretty much straightforward. And because exercise is mandatory, the exercise boundary is actually 0. So the last period calculation is pretty much simple. And then we go one step backward, do the calculation, use them again in the previous step, and so on. So we start with VKTM, which is the easiest one, calculate backwards. So this is an inductive calculation to finally arrive at VKT1. So in terms of VKT1, I can finally calculate my final option price, VXT naught. So it is fairly complicated because a lot of complicated expressions are involved, but these expressions are not the important part. These are available, using any computing software. What is more important, at least to my understanding, is the conceptual understanding of this backward induction method. That if I have a multiple decision-making problem, multiple node decision-making problem, I have to break it up, look at the problem starting from any arbitrary time point as a new problem going forward, and try to find an algorithm to solve the new problem. Because as I go nearer to the maturity time, I have less and less number of decision nodes to face. So in effect, what we can show that the easiest problem is at the end. So we solve the easiest problem first, and then we progressively come backward, use the solutions from the next period, which is already done, and solve for the bigger problem inductively. And that's how this whole algorithm will work. We will come back to this on Friday again, because I understand it's a lot to take in. You have a new concept of backward induction, which we'll need some time to understand. But my suggestion is to go back to Pliska's binomial tree example, because that is the easiest starting point for backward induction. The other part is, of course, the computational complexity. That is substantial in this case, but that is not the bigger issue here, because I won't expect you to remember all these expressions. But what I really want you to understand is how these expressions are going to be manipulated in a backward induction algorithm, so that the final expression, not the algebra, conceptually, final expression, how does it come about? All right, so we are going to stop here. So if you have any initial questions, I will take that. Otherwise, we will get back to this again on Friday. And by then, I will expect that you will look up the backward induction gaps and have questions to ask me. So are there any immediate questions? I guess not. So in that case, let us stop here and let's meet day after tomorrow.